part of the anthology collection The Edge of Madness, performed by Otis Jiry. Giving up on sleep, he rolled over and opened his eyes, annoyed at the rocks underneath the tent stabbing into his back. The humid air beat down on his face as he sat up and unzipped the tent, allowing fresh air to roll in. His eyes began to adjust to the absolute darkness that shrouded over him. "Fuck," he muttered as he rubbed his eyes. He pulled his legs out from inside the sleeping bag and then proceeded to push himself onto his knees. Reaching around the nylon floor with both hands, he took hold of anything within arm's reach to guide his way. He pulled himself across the small tent. The light shining down from the moon barely lit up the sides of the tent enough to see where the door was. Still not fully awake, he reached out in search of the zipper, but it slipped from his grasp and he fell forward. "Crap," he muttered in frustration as he sprang back up, now fully alert. He continued to feel around, his eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. "What the hell?" he muttered as he stared at the vacant point in the tent floor where his friend Tony had been sleeping. He looked from side to side and then shrugged his shoulders. He had to pee, not worry about what stupid thing his friend was off doing. He unzipped the door, the noise penetrating through the thick shroud of silence that was home only to the sound of buzzing insects and the backdrop of crickets. Pulling himself to a standing position outside the small yellow tent, he did his best to peer through the darkness that consumed the forest around him. Damn it. Turning around, he reached back into the tent to grab his shoes. He looked down at his socks. He pulled on his shoes and staggered in the direction of some bushes about 10 feet away from the tent. The patter of water added itself to the silence as he relieved himself in the bush. Leaning his head back, he let out a sigh of relief. He zipped up his pants and turned back in the direction of the tent. "Jay!" Startled, he quickly turned around toward the voice. "What the heck, man?" He looked off into the dark tree line. Tilting his head ever so slightly, he scanned his immediate surroundings. "Where are you, dude?" Jay said. "I'm out here, man. Come here. I want to show you something," the voice said from beyond the trees. "Dude, fuck you. I'm going to sleep, man. You can play in the woods by yourself," Jay said as he turned back around. "Jay!" "What?" Jay shouted this time as he turned back around toward the woods. "What are you shouting at over there, man?" a voice from behind him asked. He swung around to see Tony standing there with sandwich in hand, a morsel of which was in his mouth. "Who are you talking to? You already lose your mind out here?" Tony laughed. "You were—" Jay stopped and turned back around in the direction of the woods. "I was what?" "You were out there," Jay said as he looked off into the woods. "No, I was over there making a sandwich," Tony replied, gesturing just beyond the tent. "How long were you over there for?" asked Jay. "I don't know. I was pulling down the food sack when you left the tent. I figured I must have woken you up." Jay returned his focus back to the woods. "Somebody was definitely out there," Jay continued. "Who?" Jay shifted his focus back to Tony, but only looked at him with a blank stare. "Who was out there, Jay?" Tony persisted. "I heard a voice. It said it wanted to show me something. It sounded like you." Tony's expression quickly changed. "Come on, man, quit it with the bullshit." "I swear it sounded just like you," Jay said as his face turned cold and expressionless. "Man, enough of this. I'm going back to sleep. It's the middle of the night." Tony turned around in the direction of the tent. Jay quickly followed behind him. They both climbed in and laid back down, Jay quickly pulling the zipper closed as if something was in pursuit of him. Sorry, man, but I've got some fishing to do in the morning. Can't stay up all night listening to ghost stories, Tony said as he rolled over and pulled a blanket halfway over his face. Before long, the sound of Tony's incessant snoring joined the chorus of chirping crickets as Jay lay there staring at the roof of the tent. He hated the silence before, but now he was willing to take it over what sounded like Tony choking on his own throat. Minute after minute ticked by as Tony's snoring slowly began to blend in with the chatter of the insects, and Jay was able to drift off. "Dude, wake up!" Tony violently shook Jay. "Wake up!" Jay rustled around, then shot up. "What the hell, man?" Jay groaned. "There's something outside. I'm not playing." "What's outside?" Jay asked. "I don't know. I heard voices. I think. I don't know." The events from earlier began to pour back into Jay's mind, and he suddenly shot to attention. He took hold of Tony's shoulder. "Whose voice was it?" "What do you mean, whose voice was it? I don't know. It was just a voice." The sound of a stick snapping outside the tent caused the two boys to jump. They sat as still as they could, looking at the walls of the tent, waiting for any further signs of movement from outside. "Go and see if anything is out there," Tony demanded. Jay shot back. "Screw you, man. You go out there and check." Both of them just sat there in silence, listening closely. "All right, let's both go out," Jay said, breaking the silence. Tony nodded, and Jay leaned over and took hold of the zipper. He looked back at Tony and then slowly pulled the zipper down just enough to get a look outside. "Do you see anything?" Tony asked. "No." "Duh! Shut up, I'm looking," Jay said, cutting Tony off. Gently, he pressed his hand up against the door of the tent and peeked out, scanning in silence for any movement. "All right, let's go," Jay said as he slid on his shoes. He pushed the door open and stepped out, the rocks crunching under his feet as he stepped away from the tent. Seconds later, Tony was out of the tent and hurrying after him. I think the noise came from that way," Tony said, pointing at the woods in the back of the tent. Both of them jerked around to face a bush that was gently swaying back and forth in the light breeze. Then they jerked to the side, the dirt crunching below their feet. They looked back and forth, twisting at the slightest sound of movement. Tony glanced at Jay. "I could have sworn I just heard something." Tony's head turned back toward the tent. "Maybe I was just hearing things because you freaked me out earlier." "I know what I heard," Jay replied firmly. With his eyes firmly locked on the woods, Jay continued searching for signs of movement. Bugs flew by as moonlight shined down from above, lighting the area where the tent was and also where their campfire had been earlier that night. "Come on, Jay, I heard a noise this way," Tony stated as he gestured for Jay to follow his lead. Jay turned and hurried after Tony, who had already darted off in the direction of the woods. "Slow down, man," Jay shouted. "Dude, where are you going?" Turning back around, he saw Tony standing by the tent. Jay turned his head and looked into the woods in the direction he had just been running. Jay's heart began to rapidly pound against his chest as it tried to break through his ribcage and flee his body. "Get over here, man, what the hell?" Tony exclaimed as he started walking toward Jay. Come on, came whispers from the woods behind the tent. "Come on." Feeling a chill shoot down his neck, Jay turned his head back in the direction of the woods. Come on, the whispers said, what seemed like multiple voices. "I have something to show you. I have to. Come here, come." Tony came running up and put his hand on Jay's shoulder, snapping him out of his trance. "Let's go. Let's get the fuck out of here, dude," demanded Tony. "So many voices," Jay whispered, ignoring Tony's instructions. Tony grabbed Jay by the arm and pulled him in the direction of the truck. "It was you," Jay whispered. "No, it wasn't. I don't know what you saw, but it sure as hell wasn't me." They walked past the tent and the hanging food sack. "Wait, what about the truck?" Jay cut in. "Yeah, it's only a few miles hike. We can make it there." Jay came to a halt. "And leave all our things here? No one is going to come all the way out here just to steal our shit. You hear yourself? Let's get the hell out of here." "Whatever." Jay stepped toward Tony. "Wait," Tony said as he reached into his pockets. "Damn it, we forgot the keys." Turning around, Tony hurried back in the direction of the tent. Just as they walked back past the food sack, a zipping sound filled their ears as something closed the tent door from the inside. The tent shook slightly once, and then all went quiet. "I thought I heard something out there," a voice whispered from inside the tent. "What the heck?" Tony let out. Jay heard a rustle and turned around. "Man, stop!" Jay shouted as Tony bolted into the woods in the direction of the truck. Jay took off after him at full speed, dodging trees and jumping over logs. "Stop!" he commanded. "Wait up!" Jay tore through the woods like a lightning bolt. He nearly tripped, but somehow managed to maintain his balance as he watched Tony slowly disappear from his line of sight. Coming to a sudden halt, Jay spotted Tony just standing there, facing in the opposite direction. Jay bent forward, placing his hands on his knees, and gasped for air. "What the hell, man? Slow down," he said as he breathed heavily. Tony continued to just stand there, staring off into the distance. "Tony!" Finally, Tony turned around, eyes staring blankly into Jay's. "Come on, here's what I've been waiting to show you," Tony said, gesturing behind some brush. "Right over here." "No!" Jay shouted. "Come on," Tony said. "Come on." "Jay, where are you? Let's go." "What the fuck? I'm getting pissed." He heard Tony shouting in the distance. "It is right here. Right here." The Tony in front of him continued, pointing at the ground. Jay turned to run but tripped, falling to the ground. He smacked his head off the ground and fell into a daze before opening his eyes. The sunlight pouring into his irises, he threw up his hand to shield himself from the light flooding in through the window. The woolly blanket dropped to the side as he pushed it away from himself. After his eyes finally began to adjust to the light, he looked around the room. He glanced over at his clock. 10:46 a.m. "Are you coming down for breakfast, or what?" a woman's voice impatiently asked from somewhere outside his room. He looked around his room and then shouted back, "Yeah, 1 minute." Getting to his feet, he pulled open his drawers in search of a fresh set of clothes. After throwing them on, he opened his door and peered out into the hallway. The sun cascaded through the hallway windows, illuminating the walls and the floor as he walked down the stairs. Rounding the corner, he entered the kitchen to the side of his mother, sliding some freshly cooked eggs onto a plate. "Here's your breakfast, honey," she said as she slid the plate toward him. "Where's Dad?" "He'll be home soon. He ran to the store to get some bacon." "Can't have his eggs without bacon," she laughed. He looked down at the eggs, the smell rolling up into his nose, bringing an instant smile to his face. "This looks really good, Mom." "Well, thank you," she smiled. And for a moment he felt like he could stay there. He felt like it was a place he could call home. But it wasn't home. He didn't have any damn clue what it was. Jay looked up at his mother. "Dad's not coming home." "What do you mean? Don't say that. That's your father you're talking about. You can go sit in your room if you're going to be rude." "And That's not my room." "Jay!" his mother exclaimed. "That hasn't been my room since the house burned down 3 years ago. And Dad died running back in to try and save me, even though I wasn't even there. I snuck out earlier to hang out with friends." "Now that's enough," his mom cut in as she stood up from her chair. "I will not be having that kind of talk in my house." "This isn't our house!" Jay screamed. Darting toward the sink, he furiously started pulling open drawers. "Sit down!" He pulled open a third drawer and reached in, grasping the handle of a large kitchen knife. Jay turned to face his mom. "Well, I guess if this is real, then this is going to cause a world of pain." Jay swallowed heavily and then bolted toward his mother. "Wake up!" He swung the knife at her, stabbing Tony in the chest. Tony gagged. Jay sat up and pushed Tony's bleeding body off of him. Ch! Tony gagged, blood filling his lungs. "No! What the hell?" Jay shouted as he stared in disbelief at his friend who lay on the ground with a jagged stick protruding from his chest. Taking hold of the stick, Jay pulled on it in a desperate attempt to remove it from his friend's chest. Tony cried out in pain before closing his eyes. The tears began to well up in Jay's eyes as he crawled backward and sat down. No, this isn't happening. This isn't real." "You found it. It's here," a voice said from behind him. Quickly, he stood up and turned around to see Tony standing in front of him. Tony's mouth moved, but Jay couldn't hear a single word that passed his lips. Suddenly, Jay's dad emerged from the darkness of the woods, and the two of them closed in around Jay. Tony halted just inches away from Jay. "We're here, Jay. Come join us." "No!" Jay pushed himself back. "This isn't real. This can't be real." A tear trickled down his face. "Tony!" He looked down at the motionless body of his friend. "Tony, get up, please." "You can join us forever and be happy." Jay's father smiled. "Happy, Jay, happy." Tony knelt down. "Just come and be with us." "No, you aren't real." He crawled backward until he reached a ledge, his hand almost slipping. He managed to regain his composure and peeked over the edge of the cliff. With his surroundings shrouded in darkness, there was no possible way that he could gauge how deep it was. Come. The thing standing before him continued. "No!" Jay screamed again. He saw no other option. With the front blocked off by the things, Jay pulled at the edge, toppling himself down the hill. He rolled and bounced, smacking off branches and rocks. Finally, with a shattering thud, he landed at the bottom. He groaned in pain, feeling it quickly pulsating through his body. His neck hurt worse than anything he had ever felt before. The pain radiated down his spine. He tried to push himself up. He tried to get himself up and run. Slowly, he opened his eyes and let the sun in. With his whole body trying to refuse him, he looked around. "Hon, come downstairs before your dad eats your breakfast."